Welcome to my channel and my first official vlog. My name is Charity, and yes, that is my real name. I am an ENFJ, a quad left 3-6 pure generator. I am a Leo with a Scorpio rising and a Gemini moon, along with having the 8th house as my dominant energy. My life has revolved around complex trauma, abuse, intimacy, and at times extreme transformations. While I am not a doctor or a therapist, I am a relentless seeker of knowledge, and I am deeply passionate about trying to understand human behavior. In my opinion, I feel that human design and astrology provide a deeper insight into a person's nature than the conventional assessments laid out by the DSM. This is based off over the 100 readings I've given, along with my own research I've done on criminal charts, in addition to my schooling and extensive 25-year self-education in psychology with a strong focus on personality and the criminal mind. So that is why you're often going to hear it referenced in my lessons, especially in this one. Now, a word of caution, this video does discuss topics such as abuse and suicide. If these topics are triggering for you, please ensure that you have some support before continuing to listen. Well, let's get started, shall we? Socrates' well-known phrase, know thyself, implies this understanding of one's own motivations and true essence. To know this requires usually a journey of self-awareness, acknowledging the both good and bad aspects of our character. Everyone has a dark side, and it needs to be acknowledged and integrated rather than ignored or allowed to run wild. However, it often takes another to make us aware of our darkness, challenging us in relationships to help us evolve into these better versions of ourselves. This is one of my greatest gifts and challenges, as I possess this unique ability to see those dark hidden depths of people, but I also have this clear empathic knowing of what's caused it and the potential that lies behind it. Now, this ability is only strengthened since I've learned human design and astrology, but it's been a natural gift of mine since I was a child. However, this ability does often attract individuals with levels of narcissistic or sociopathic tendencies, because I have this resilience in dealing with such personalities. I can empathize with their pain, and I feel compelled to want to help them reach this potential that I see in hopes to break this cycle of hurt people hurt people. This is the reason that's really driven my interest in psychology. Like, why do people hurt people? Why does fear often prevail over love? A significant issue seems to reside in Western culture's emphasis on the independent self. It's this great misunderstood belief, especially in spiritual circles, that humans are completely autonomous, with free will being the ultimate power. Statements like you choose how to react, or you attract what you deserve, or no one can make you feel a certain way has escalated into this victim blaming. And then, of course, toxic positivity. Yet we are a social species. We are biologically and psychologically programmed to allow others to influence us. In addition, our decisions are driven by subconscious motivations, such as repressed or childhood trauma, primal instincts, whether you're drinking a hot or cold coffee, and by those we deem as authority. Yes, we possess free will, but we are only free to what we know. So without self-awareness or open-mindedness, do you really know who's driving your decisions? Over the last few decades, antisocial and narcissistic behavior has been rising, while compassionate empathy, the type that allows us to genuinely feel and comprehend the effects of our actions on others, has been declining. This form of empathy is what prevents atrocities like burning people at the stake or genocide, environment destruction. It is crucial to have this for the preservation of the planet, but empathy starts at the individual level. If someone remains trapped in their trauma and lets their fear guide them, they get stuck in survival mode, triggering these high levels of harmful behavior, which is passed down through our families, creating a cycle of generational suffering, or what is referred to as intergenerational trauma, which is trauma that is passed from a survivor to the descendants. Now, this can be done directly if the parent has experienced abuse as a child, and that cycle of trauma and abuse impacts their parenting to a child, or indirectly through genetics if parents experience oppression, including racial trauma or other systemic oppression, or a collective traumatic event such as the Holocaust. Now, instead of providing support and understanding, we tend to take the latest trend or discovery as the end-all be-all solution, and frequently encounter dismissive comments like, well, they're just crazy, or there's no cure for them, or they're never going to change. And this mindset is then magnified by social media that fosters this collective despair and fear. The society succumbs to fears. It often elects leaders who exploits it. Our leaders are a representation of who we are as a collective nation. And as we approach this next election, it is very crucial to understand this. Because the scary thing right now, the person is leading in the polls has 91 felony counts in 4 different criminal cases, not to mention civil suits of fraud and rape. This begs the question, when did we lose the expectation that the president should embody moral integrity and be free of a criminal record? When those in power exhibit racism, greed, or these sociopathic tendencies, it gives permissions to individuals to echo those same behaviors. This is why it's imperative to demand better from our leaders and elect ones that possess hope, moral guidance, empathy, and competency to drive us towards a better future. Because from a human design and astrological perspective, the current social atmosphere does not paint an optimistic picture of what lies ahead. And that is based off historical patterns. So how does the concept of leaders and society connect to the lessons of understanding the other and the story that I'm about to share? Well, I believe it comes down to how we treat others and view interpersonal relationships. If we lack empathy for those that we're supposed to love intimately, how can we extend that care to our neighbors or complete strangers in a foreign country somewhere? In today's world, there's a noticeable retreat from confronting challenges within personal relationships, which mirrors a broader reluctance to address societal issues. The cornerstone for advocating for others stems from this strong interpersonal bond, and it seems to be crumbling. This erosion can be contributed to, in part, the increase of technology and these online dating platforms, which subtly suggests that the notion of partners are very easily replaceable. This perpetuates a cycle where investing in deep, meaningful connection is no longer needed because there's always going to be a backup, which then fosters a scarcity of genuine emotional engagement, which is critical for nurturing empathy. The implications of this shift are not just philosophical, but have tangible effects on our well-being and survival as a species. For instance, a comprehensive meta-analysis of 148 studies highlighted that weak social bonds significantly increase the risk of premature death by 50%. Now, that is a risk factor on par for smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, surpassing obesity and physical inactivity. This statistic alone underlines the profound importance of strong interpersonal relationships for our health. Another critical issue is the evolving understanding and often misconstrued definition of abuse. We have normalized unacceptable behaviors, and it's allowing us to desensitize to what constitutes as abuse, which leads to then blurring the lines of healthy and harmful interactions when it comes to interpersonal relationships. This lack of clarity dampens our ability to foster these healthy, supportive, and empathic connections, which are vital for both personal and societal well-being. So why are we having all these problems in relationships? Well, according to developmental psychology, the concept of love and trust are formed in our early years, depending on which theory you want to go with, up to age 5. Now, according to the World Health Organization, nearly 3 out of 4 children ages 2 to 4 suffer from physical abuse or psychological violence at the hands of a parent or a caregiver. That is 75% of children between ages 2 to 4. 75%. Not to mention, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys in the United States experience child sexual abuse, at which 90% is from a family member or a child from someone that the child trusted. In the past year alone, at least 1 out of 7 children in the United States were reported to experience child abuse or neglect. When a child faces mistreatment or abuse, it's like a plant being deprived of sunlight and water. This commonly leads to issues in how their brain and nervous system and their immune system will develop. As a result, they will face a higher risk of various problems later in life. This includes depression, obesity, even turning to alcohol and drugs, and they're also going to struggle in their relationships, either ending up in toxic situations or displaying toxic behaviors themselves while not fully understanding why. Now, when I say toxic, I'm talking about actions involving abuse, manipulation, dishonesty, or this lack of empathy. This is often referred to somebody that possesses a narcissistic, borderline, or sociopathic personality disorder. However, for myself, I am not talking in regards to psychological definitions or labels. I am referring to patterns of behavior. Someone acting narcissistic means that they're showcasing a weak level of empathy or emotional intelligence, a sense of superiority over others, whether it be overt or covert. But either way, they show this disregard for another person's needs or desires, but then they expect their needs and desires to be met at all times. Sociopaths represent a more severe condition characterized by this absence of moral consciousness and no compassionate empathy, particularly apparent in defensive and triggered-like state. It usually leads to harmful actions without remorse, refusing to take any responsibility, and believing they should not be held accountable for their actions afterwards. Psychopaths represent a more extreme level, where these negative traits are consistently present and are linked to some kind of biological condition. But what most people don't understand is that these are also defined as personality traits that exist on a very wide spectrum. They are not fixed conditions. These are coping mechanisms that is often referred to as a trauma response. So I believe that if it can be learned, it can be unlearned. And I'm not the only one that believes this, as there's been this movement in psychology that emphasizes the importance of understanding the whole person, including their history, environment, emotional life, rather than simply characterizing behavior as a symptom of a disorder. One way is recognizing that someone endures complex trauma can result in developing complex PTSD, a term that is yet to be indoctrinated into the DSM, despite the strong push for it. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, is a type of PTSD caused by repeated or chronic traumatic events lasting months or years. Often childhood physical, emotional, or sexual abuse and neglect develops into complex PTSD, but it can develop at any age. The symptoms vary amongst people, but include emotional symptoms, including the lack of emotional regulation, depression, rage, and emotional flashbacks. And it can also be behavioral by avoiding certain actions, sexually acting out, alcohol or drug misuse, or self-destructiveness. It can be cognitively, causing nightmares or dissociation, being self-critical, changes in the belief systems, or distorted views of others. Interpersonally related as well by having difficulties or maintaining relationships or having chaotic relationships or attachment issues. It can also result as somatization, which is when you have physical symptoms that don't have underlying medical causes, such as rapid heart rate or dizziness or digestive issues. Pete Walker wrote a book on fact of diagnosing and treating complex PTSD. And he describes it as being 4 types of defensive structures under the 4 Fs. Now, most people have heard of these trauma responses, which is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. They develop in childhood, usually based off abuse or neglect patterns. In interpersonal relationships, it can be used as an unconscious attempt to avoid danger or maintain some kind of attachment. It can also result as what most people are familiar with is the attachment theory, or it can also be associated with a personality disorder or a type that is often misdiagnosed. This can trigger emotional flashbacks to childhood trauma without people even realizing it and causing these intense feelings such as fear, shame, alienation, rage, grief, and depression. As for the 4 Fs, fight is believing that you have power or control to ensure safety, to avoid getting abandoned, or a way to secure love. It often developed in childhood that has a narcissistic parent. They can use anger or contempt to intimidate or shame others. They tend to be dominating in relationships. They may also have views of themselves as perfect or project their critical standards onto others. And they can often be misdiagnosed for narcissism or antisocial personality disorder. A flight response is believing that perfectionism will somehow make them safe and lovable. They usually respond to family trauma with hyperactivity, being an overachiever, or engaging in some kind of risky behavior. They tend to use work, such as a workaholic, or activities to flee from inner pain of abandonment, and they usually lack attachments. This can develop into severe anxiety and panic disorders. It can also be mistaken for obsessive compulsive disorder or a mild form of bipolar disorder or ADHD. Freeze response is someone that finds safety in solitude. They will separate themselves, but it's usually that they found profoundly abandoned. They tend to hide or isolate or avoid human contact. This can manifest to revolve around dissociation, to disconnect from pain of abandonment. They seek comfort in sleep or daydreaming or video games. They exhibit schizo-like type attachments, detachment from reality when highly traumatized or triggered. They are usually unaware that this is a fear or the fact that they even have this internal critic that is constantly going on, and it can spiral into severe depression. Fawning is the ultimate codependent. It is someone that seeks safety by merging with another person's wishes, needs, or demands instead of their own. They will forfeit their own rights and needs. They have a hard time establishing boundaries and relationships. This often emerges in childhood as someone that is the caretaker of the family. They usually have one parent that usually scared or shamed them into developing an unhealthy sense of self, and are usually attracted to narcissistic individuals who exploit and use them. They may also experience intense emotional flashbacks that lead to dissociation when they find themselves expressing their needs and when they're not being met. However, understand that complex PTSD, well, it's complex, and most trauma survivors exhibit a combination of the F responses. There are 3 different types of fawn types, and they're also the common hybrid of the fight and fawn and the flight and freeze. The first step to addressing any problem is awareness. And of course, that in itself has caused a problem because a lot of people today can simply just turn to online platforms such as YouTube or TikTok, and then you consume this information like, how do I identify that your partner is a narcissist, or signs that your partner is an avoidant? However, most people do not neatly fit into these categories outlined by a checklist, particularly when it comes to abnormal behavior. Topics such as narcissism, gaslighting, emotional abuse, and the attachment theory is what is currently trending, but is being widely misunderstood. The issue lies in the fact that we're attempting to learn the attachment theory, which is based in developmental psychology. Then we're trying to compare it to narcissism and sociopathy, which is abnormal or clinical psychology, claiming that it all boils down to a person's motivation or their intent, which is biological or behavioral psychology, all the while trying to understand it from a social psychology perspective. So when I see a video that says, hey, what's the difference between a narcissist and a dismissive avoidant? Well, I don't know. What's the difference between an apple and an orange? They're both fruit and sweet and grow on a tree, but guess what? They're fundamentally different. Not to mention, there's different varieties of apples and oranges. All of it boils down to an unconscious fear of survival, but how it is expressed often contradicts what is causing it. So intent can be easily misunderstood. Not to mention, it's often assumed instead of actually knowing. Understanding complex behaviors requires discernment and a comprehensive knowledge rather than assumption and judgment. Neither TikTok nor this video is going to provide you with a definitive answer unless you truly know a person. And the problem is that you may not ever know that person because if they don't reveal to you who they truly are. Keep in mind, clinical psychologists that are trained to figure it out don't even get it right at times. Studies have shown that 40% of people that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder have received the wrong diagnosis. And this is why I have a huge passion for human design and astrology. And it irritates me when it's claimed to be pseudoscience or fake, because these systems are able to actually pull back these deep layers and truly grasp the nature of the person as a whole, because every single person is unique and every person's chart is unique to them. It's not about labeling somebody as flawed. It instead encourages a more holistic approach to a person's behavior and mental health, recognizing that change and growth is always possible. In order for the collective to change, the individual must change first. And this is true on both sides, which brings me to the flip side of this issue. It's often in emotionally abusive relationships, the one that is being abused is often labeled as crazy or borderline, where the person's conducting the abuse is defended because they often act in a cool and calm collective manner. However, the one that is acting crazy is acting this way because of a reaction, not an action. There are more resources out there that outline the signs of abuse. In fact, probably too much, as it's defined differently depending on which one you're looking at, but it rarely speaks of what it looks like for the person. Not to mention, stress-induced emotions are often looked at as really negatively, claiming that it's the person that's automatically unstable when it should be looked at as a concern. Now, please understand, no matter if it's human design, astrology, a trauma response, or even a disorder, I am not suggesting that anybody should tolerate mistreatment or abuse. This is not about blindly standing by your partner. I'm only talking about the people that fall in the middle of the spectrum area that are definitely capable of change. However, just because someone is capable of change does not mean they are receptive to change. And so you have to decide on your own what your own threshold is. Now, I can admit my own guilt in misjudging those relationships. I have also misjudged others that have been the victim of abuse. I know people that have committed suicide over emotionally abusive relationships, and I never truly understood why until I found myself in my own situation, and then it became very, very clear. This all brings me to the life lessons I'm about to share with you. Other than my childhood, most of what I'm about to share is not a guide on what to do. It is a guide on what not to do. I am a 3/6, as I mentioned prior, and that line 3 is really dominant in my human design. This means, being a line 3, that I am prone to make mistakes. In fact, I'm supposed to make them often, multiple times in a row, because eventually I will get it right. And then I have this wisdom that I can provide to others. But as you can see on the topic that I'm sharing, I am still a work in progress. So keep that in mind. So for those essential 2 to 4 years of childhood development, I was exposed to a malignant sociopath, which of whom was my biological father. Now, I cannot tell you why my father didn't see this cute little girl and think, oh my God, I want to keep her safe and protect her. Instead, I was looked at of lust for his own pleasure. Even at that young age, though, I knew it was wrong. I don't recall ever feeling love towards him, only just disgust and fear. I never saw anything good in him, even when he would try to pretend that he cared. I believe this is probably what activated my gift, because I was forced to seek it out in others. However, by age 3, I was over it. Yeah, age 3. I ended up running away from home. Now, I will never forget that day, probably because it set things in motion that allowed me to report him to CPS and get out of the home for good. Unfortunately, he never got punishment for it, though, because of this all happened in the early 80s. During that time, child sexual abuse wasn't fully accepted because people didn't want to believe that a caregiver was capable of sexually abusing their own child. I think knowing that he got away with it kind of shaped my core values into this relentless pursuit of truth and justice, because I couldn't comprehend how no one cared that he wasn't hurting not just me, but multiple others. It ingrained in me this determination and sense of responsibility to want to stop people from causing harm to others by helping those I encounter to be better, even if it meant I have to endure suffering myself. Now, as I got older, this of course led to complications in my relationships on a subconscious level. My first significant relationship was with my high school sweetheart, which was a 7-year commitment that was supposed to end in marriage, but instead ended up with him having multiple infidelities. I was 23 at the time I found out, and that was my first experience of betrayal from somebody that I loved and I thought loved me. It left me feeling really bitter and skeptical about relationships because of how I found out. I had a really hard time believing that anyone was good or trustworthy, which led me to these series of unhealthy relationships with men that were either married or in a relationship themselves or struggling with some kind of addiction, whether it be drug or alcohol. These men mirrored my father, and subconsciously, I believed that was the type of attachment that I deserved. It didn't make me feel good, though, and I realized, okay, there's something definitely wrong with this and extremely unhealthy. I decided to seek out therapy, which was something that I never received as a child. I immediately stopped being the other woman, but it took me years to really let go of those addictions and those overt emotional unavailability type of men. But by 2015, I believed I was healed because I met this entirely different man that I had never dated before. He was free of addiction, significantly older than me, and he owned his own health practice. I felt extremely lucky, like thinking I really leveled up here and finally getting what I deserved. However, this 6-year relationship proved to be the most challenging thing I've ever endured in my life, and it almost killed me. The details of this is very complicated, and it would take a series of videos to explain it, but I'm going to try to give you the Cliff Notes versions because it's a foundational part of my current journey. In summary, that man that seemed so different from all the others turned out to be a high-functioning sociopath, and that has been confirmed by psychological evaluation. So after enduring 4 years of subtle emotional abuse, which initially I didn't even recognize because emotional abuse wasn't discussed or well known yet, it led to this severe mental crisis at the beginning of a 2-year on and off breakup that turned into these toxic levels of emotional abuse and turmoil that led me to attempting to take my own life twice. This relationship really caused me to lose myself because in those 4 years, I altered everything about who I was. I transitioned from being a socialite that threw events and parties, full of ambition, to completely isolating myself from everybody with absolutely no motivation to do anything. I knew this wasn't normal, and I really did question whether or not I was dealing with a sociopath. However, cognitively, I was really conflicted because my understanding of sociopaths were limited to the DSM, my father, or the serial killers that I had been focused on and studied. This experience really highlighted for me the shortcomings of psychology and categorizing complex human behavior. However, I felt stuck with him with this sense of responsibility to help him because I had violated my own principles and failed to seek justice when I had the opportunity to do so. Being in this constant state of survival, I tried every tactic possible to stop him from hurting me. So whenever I noticed a slight indication of success, I would use it as a weapon of self-protection. This usually involved something what is called reaction abuse by threatening what it was that he valued most, which was definitely not me or my life, but his reputation or his career. Now, to clarify, reaction abuse is not considered a form of abuse. It is considered a form of self-defense. Eventually, though, I did have a breaking point and I did give up the fight. However, moving on was a struggle for me, not to mention this was my first exposure to the term complex PTSD, and understanding this was a condition that I had possessed was also very discouraging because I found out I have a genetic predisposition for high levels of re-experiencing. So all those emotional flashbacks, all those triggers, I'm going to experience at a much higher level than a normal person. But I pursued every option I could in hopes to heal. I did EMDR, brain spotting, CBT, DBT, multiple hypnotherapies, past life regression, Reiki, tobacco healing, and I even journeyed to the underworld to see if I could confront my demons. I mean, every little bit helped, but I could not figure out what was really driving these feelings of unworthiness until I discovered human design and learned more about astrology. And this was actually life-saving for me. It provided me this framework to not only understand my excessive behaviors, but my life path. It was like viewing out this story mapped out right in front of me, offering insights of why it happened and when. In the simplest of terms, what I realized is that what I was feeling was actually not mine. I was carrying my excess pain and his shadows and then taking them on my own. So to understand this, in human design, the centers that are colored in is the energy that you give out to other people. This is a fixed energy, not to be influenced after development, but it can be conditioned in childhood and will hold on to any unresolved trauma. Where the areas are white is the energy you're taking in from others. It is constantly being conditioned by others or the transits. So self-awareness on these centers, how they express themselves, is key. So for myself, my identity, spleen, and will center are undefined, along with my head and emotional center being 100% open. So how I think, what I question, how I feel, give love, my sense of security, fears, and self-worth can be easily conditioned by those around me. And my ex had his identity, will, spleen, and head defined. So I realized this lack of self-worth was not mine. It was his, and I was just being conditioned by it, and I could finally let it go. Now, as I was working on my healing, I was determined not to rush back into dating until I felt truly ready, because I did not want to repeat any past mistakes or bring old wounds into a new relationship. I knew I needed to be free of any lingering hate or anger towards my ex, and eventually I did get there. So after 7 years of getting back into the dating scene full time, I realized a lot has changed. So early this past July, I was just honestly ready to give up. I was so frustrated with it all. But for some reason, I shouted out to the universe like, oh my God, all I want is, and I shouted out this celebrity name, which I won't reveal to protect the identity of the person I will be speaking about, but it's a pretty common first name. And for some reason, I've never dated anybody with it or connected to anybody with this name before, but I did the very next day. I'm someone who strongly believes in signs. So I interpreted this as the universe simply responding to my call. Our initial meeting was a simple coffee date, but we really had this fascinating conversation. I learned that he was an Aquarius, which is why I'm going to refer to him as A throughout this story. As I mentioned, I am a Leo, and in the realm of astrology, Aquarius and Leo sits on the opposite ends, and this concept is known as an opposition. When these two signs come together, it implies a relationship of contrast, balance, but also complementary. This aspect suggests that there's likely going to be initial challenges, but it's designed to foster growth through broader understanding and appreciation of a different perspectives that can ultimately lead to this deeply rewarding relationship. A did ask me on a second date, but before we went, I wanted to make sure I got his human design chart to see if there was anything I needed to be concerned about. There was a few concerns. Notably, he has gate 49 as his personality sun, which is 70% of his personality. Gate 49 is a gate of revolution. And in a shadow state, it indicates this profound fear of commitment, usually stemming from deep-seated fear of rejection or emotional pain or hurt. In its reactive form, this shadow will lead to someone sabotaging a relationship. The more they develop their feelings for you, the quicker they're going to run from it. Also, in his identity, he had gate 10, which is a gate that my ex had as well. Gate 10 is a very potent gate, and it reflects the behavior of the self. This behavior is influenced by self-love, and self-awareness and it is the epitome of know thyself. However, this gate can also be heavily conditioned by upbringing. So if someone experiences neglect or harsh criticism, the capacity for self-love can be distorted into feelings of self-loathing or being unlovable. In a reactive state, this will manifest as narcissism. So on our second date, I chose to explore these deeper aspects of him, and to my surprise, he was remarkably open about it. He admitted that he had a fear of commitment. It was a realization that came to light following the unexpected ending of his previous relationship he had a year prior. This had prompted him to seek therapy quite intensely, with this genuine desire to face his fears and become more emotionally open. His level of self-awareness was truly impressive and encouraging for me, because it also aligned with his chart, where those gift sides of the shadows embody this theme of self-discovery and growth, and allows someone to become the highest version of themselves. By the time the third date came around, we did sleep together, because sexual compatibility, whether it's emotional or not, is incredibly important to me. This was a significant issue in my last relationship, and I was determined to avoid any hint of a problem at all. Fortunately, this was not an issue. In fact, he not only met my expectations, but he actually exceeded them. Following our third date, we began seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, openly sharing our individual fears and expectations. I provided him details about my past relationships, including my last one and previous suicide attempts. In turn, he shared his own traumas and expressed a desire for a serious relationship that he was hoping would lead into marriage. He aspired to a partnership that could withstand any challenge, and with this mutual dedication and a partner that was willing to fight for the relationship, not someone that would just walk away at the first sign of trouble, because he believed that relationships required work and compromise. This viewpoint aligned with my own approach to relationships as well, so I thought, well, this is a perfect fit. And as we spent more time together, I found myself increasingly attracted to his intelligence and his emotional transparency. And then that was further intensified with this remarkable sexual chemistry. And he reciprocated those feelings, affirming that I had met all of his boxes as well. However, he did make it clear that it typically takes him 2 to 3 months to commit to a relationship. And I was okay with that because I wasn't in a hurry to rush into something, considering this was the first engagement with somebody since my ex. Personally, though, I only date one person at a time. I know this is abnormal, but the idea of juggling multiple partners just isn't something I'm comfortable with, nor do I have the time or energy for it. Furthermore, I will not sleep with more than one person at a time simply due to health reasons. He was also in alignment with that, though, saying that he doesn't sleep with more than one person either. And so that was enough for me. I didn't care if he was just going on random dates. He also made it clear to me that progressing as far as I had with him was quite rare. He was also very open to expressing his affection towards me. He frequently voiced how fortunate he felt to have met me, how lucky he was, and that he really liked me. And it felt sincere. It wasn't coming off in a love bombing or manipulative way. And through this, I had developed this deep admiration for him and respect. It was a very secure and trusting feeling, which was also new to me, as my previous relationships often sparked anxiety, even the beginning steps. I did hold back on expressing my feelings openly towards him because I didn't want it to come off as I was putting too much pressure on him or myself until about a month and a half into us dating. I wanted to understand where I stood with him at the time because he was, again, saying how lucky he was. And I was like, well, if you feel so lucky, then what are you looking for? What else do you need? However, at the same time, I did acknowledge the fact that it was okay if he needed more time because he frequently stated that it took him 2 to 3 months to commit. I didn't want him to have to feel like he was being pushed into anything and he wasn't ready. So I even offered space. And I, just to say, are we spending too much time together? Is that what you need to come to a clear decision? He did indicate that he needed more time, but he didn't want space. In fact, we ended up making plans even later on that night. And he left reassuring me that he had feelings for me. Well, later on that day, he unexpectedly canceled our plans. And this was extremely unlike him. And I had sensed something was up, but I was like, I'm not going to overthink this, until he canceled again 3 days later. Up to this point, his behavior had been incredibly consistent. I mean, we had gone on probably over 15 dates and there was no signs of cancellation, not even a hint of him ever doing that. So this sudden shift in behavior set up my complex PTSD, and I immediately regretted being so emotionally open with him. Previously to this, I did stress to him, though, the importance of communication and maintaining a healthy relationship. I shared with him about how my ex used silence as a weapon, deliberately ignoring me as this way to provoke a reaction. And this is a tactic known as stonewalling. Stonewalling is a way of intentionally or unintentionally, verbally or not verbally withdrawing from a conflict. What is intentional is usually because someone's having some extreme fear or reliving some childhood experience where they learn speaking up could be dangerous. When it's intentional, it's someone that's being dismissive or accusatory or aggressive in a way that's designed to end the discussion. They'll change the subject, ignore what the other person is saying, or they'll find an excuse to avoid having to talk through it, usually through procrastination, saying we'll talk about it at a later time. Stonewalling on purpose or intentional is considered emotional abuse. It is exerting control over another person by acting as if their attention and interests are an award to be earned, or dismissing somebody as if their needs don't matter. It's a common behavior from those who exhibit high levels of narcissistic and sociopathic traits. If stonewalling becomes an ingrained pattern in your relationship through a communication style, it will eventually ruin the relationship. It can definitely make someone feel extremely frustrated, helpless, confused, disrespected, worthless, or angry. Stonewalling often leads the person that is trying to engage in healthy communication to act out in desperation or turn to a reaction of abuse to get some kind of response from another person. So going back with A, naturally, I wanted to express my confusion on this and get some clarity on the sudden change of behavior, but his responses ended up turning into gaslighting, which led my response then into flooding him with text messages because it was taking him hours to respond and he wouldn't answer my call or call me back. Now, I admit I am not the best at handling arguments through text. It makes me feel very restricted in communication. So instead of sending brief messages, I tend to send lengthy texts repeatedly until I get every word out. Gemini moon, remember? All that flooding of text messages then led to him labeling me as emotionally unstable and being dramatic, even though he wasn't explaining his reasons for canceling or the sudden shift in behavior. In response, then I pointed out, okay, well, you're acting narcissistic, because he kept emphasizing we're just dating. We're not in this committed relationship. We're not boyfriend and girlfriend. And which was confusing because I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? It basically meant that my needs don't matter or are irrelevant to him because we're just dating. After a few days of this emotional strain, we did manage to meet up in person and actually had a mature conversation. We both apologized and acknowledged our roles in the conflict, which stemmed basically from this huge miscommunication. This experience, though, led me to really reflect on the importance of not judging someone based on their actions because of what I was feeling through a past experience and the complication that's going to bring in when you have triggers with complex PTSD. Well, things went back to normal and we continued dating, and he continually expressed the importance of emotional intimacy and being connected and how lucky he was. And he even said he felt he won the lottery with me. Now, when he stated that, we were at this 2-month mark, and this gave me enough courage to revisit that earlier conversation about commitment. I brought it up, and with this talk, he did affirm to me that he was ready for a commitment, but he just needed like a week or two more because he wasn't emotionally there 100%. He was in the final phases of closure with his last relationship, and he wanted a little bit more time with his therapist. And I was like, okay, well, that's fine. But I just want to make it clear to you that if you're not serious about committing, I'm going to consider dating other people, because I really wanted to avoid developing any unrequited feelings for him. I was really trying to keep my attachment and my emotions at bay. I didn't want to get any deeper feelings if it wasn't going to move forward. Now, he did say the idea of him dating somebody else would bother him, even though he was still, hanging out with other people. And it would actually probably motivate him to want to commit. Immediately following this conversation, he said he wanted to do something special for me because I deserved that, and to reciprocate all the nice things that I've done for him. However, instead of following through on this, he disappeared. This was more alarming than the time before, because this time his phone was off completely, making him unreachable. And it was the first time that I experienced that with him. And I didn't even think he could have his phone off because of his job. We didn't talk daily, but it had been a few days since he had left without saying any word, considering that we were supposed to have these plans to do something really special. So I began to worry. I'm literally thought, oh my God, did he die? What if he's dead? What if he got on an accident on the way home and I didn't know? What if he's laying somewhere hurt and no one's helping him? Because that just seemed more rational to me than him deliberately avoiding me, especially after we had overcome this previous challenge. And he knew about my triggers and what complex PTSD was. He wasn't hurt. He decided to head to the mountains where there was no service and not tell me. When I finally did hear from him, he kind of brushed off my concerns, asserting me that he didn't have to tell me what he was doing because we're just dating. I said, you're right. You don't. Not even if we were in a relationship, you don't have to tell me anything. However, there is this thing called common courtesy and respect. So frustrated by all of this and this lack of respect, and then him going into these gaslighting behaviors again, that we're just dating and he doesn't have to do this or that, I attempted to end things. However, he completely ignored that and claimed that he was the one breaking up with me. After some back and forth, I was like, you know what, fine. If you want to break up with me, if that's what makes you feel better, go for it. But can we just please have this mature conversation beforehand? I would like some closure and clarity, because I would really like to understand how it went from you winning the lottery with me and wanting to do something special to having nothing to do with me in the course of 3 days. His response was to laugh at me, claiming closure was only necessary for people in relationships and that I had to leave them alone. Of course, this was upsetting because our previous conversation only 3 days prior had been about the importance of closure as well. He had assured me that he would not deny me of this, yet he did. And I was really disappointed. But, it had only been a couple of months, so I wasn't overwhelmed by heartbreak. The situation was highly triggering because I did feel like I had been lied to and misled, but I was able to recover quickly from it because I decided to channel all that triggering energy into creating a video similar to the one I'm discussing with you now. Over the course of 3 days, I recorded nonstop and spent countless hours editing. Just as I was about to finish, my computer crashed and erased all of my editing work. Now, I questioned, is this the universe telling me not to post this? But I was like, why? I felt like this is what I was meant to do. So I refused to be deterred, and I spent the next 8 hours re-editing everything. And right when I'm ready to render it, the program freezes over and over, no matter what I did. Still determined though, I was like, fine, I'll just upload the unedited version. I don't care. Which took me over 2 hours to upload for YouTube, only to display an error saying that it failed. And I was like, okay, universe, what do you want from me? Why are you stopping me from doing this? Is this not the purpose? Is this not why we met? 5 minutes later, a texted me saying, hey, hope you're doing well, after 5 days of complete silence. This is the type of moment for me where my intuitive side that's driven by empathy argues with my psychological side that's driven by logic, which stated, don't you respond to him. He showed you disrespect and disregarded your feelings. You see the red flags and the pattern of behavior. Don't you do it. But my intuitive side is rebutting, saying, come on, You ask the universe for an answer and a message to you. People are complex. You know that they make mistakes and you like him. So maybe we should see where this goes. Now it's like, yeah, I'll take that one. I met again in person and I allowed him to lead this one. He explained to me that his therapist had helped him understand my actions, that it came from this place of loving and caring. And he then stated too that his therapist really liked me and thought I was good for him, saying I was therapist approved. As flattering as it was, I did explain to him that I did not want to date him anymore. I said, if we're going to move forward, we're going to have to be exclusive because I need to create this boundary with you because of my stance against emotional abuse and gaslighting behavior. He said he understood and agreed on being exclusive. Over the next course of 2 weeks, I felt our relationship really flowered into something that was really secure. It was the first time in years that I felt like genuine happiness and peace. And I felt like it was time to take the next step. And that was introducing him to my friends. And all of them would be gathered at an upcoming psychic fair. This was really important to me because I am an extrovert and I wanted to observe how someone being an introvert like him would handle a social situation. And surprisingly, he agreed to go. However, a few days prior to the fair, accidentally stumbled upon what I'm going to refer to as a forum. This is a platform that allows women to share experiences about men that are toxic, married, or in relationships, helping others potentially avoid a harmful situation. I can appreciate the integrity behind this, even though you should know and understand that it be taken with a grain of salt. And before anybody jumps to conclusion, I am aware that men are also doing this and they're posting about the women that they dated in a lot less dignified way. Now, I actually did not expect to find A on this, but he was. Few comments were concerning, such as him shutting down his emotions and fleeing from conflict, which then established this long-term pattern of unhealthy behavior. However, most of the comments didn't really align with my experience with him. Almost all the women that had posted had gone on only 1 or 2 dates with him, and they were all prior to us being exclusive. Now, like I said, he's an introvert, but specifically, he is an INTP, which is a rare personality type, and those that don't fully understand him can be easily misunderstood by who they are. And I can empathize with this because, as I mentioned, I am an ENFJ, which is also a very rare type. In fact, the odds of an ENFJ and an INTP even randomly crossing paths, it's only 0.07%. Now, this doesn't factor in the account of a relationship or gender. So when these two types do connect, it's often referred to a soulmate type connection where the parties will grow and learn and potentially form into this beautiful relationship. You see the recurring theme that we have going on here? I did end up confronting him about my concerns. I was careful not to reveal the source of my information, but he knew exactly what I was talking about, saying he'd actually already had access to it. But when I did discuss issue of concern, not related to the behavior, but something else, he avoided taking responsibility for it and downplayed it as it wasn't significant, which was troubling to me because I was like, if you can't acknowledge this problem, how am I going to trust that you're not going to do the same thing to me? And I had questioned whether or not he discussed it with his therapist, which he said he hadn't, suggesting a lack of transparency in his therapy sessions and possibly not getting the right help that he needs. As I was discussing this with him, though, I could feel the fear in him start to rise up. And I swear, I mean, it felt like a little boy had just gotten his hand caught in the cookie jar. And I have learned at this point that when that fear is starting to come up, there's a trigger that's not very far behind it. And it came the very next morning because suddenly everything had changed and he wasn't ready for a relationship anymore. He still wanted to date me, reassuring how much he liked me and that he had really strong feelings for me. He's just not ready to be boyfriend and girlfriend. And I was like, no, I am not going backwards. I also reiterated this importance of the boundary that I had set to prevent any further emotional abuse. I expressed to him my willingness to support him through this growth and change. And I emphasized that my intention to bring up these concerns was not to judge him for his past, but to help him grow and learn from it. He said he appreciated that. And then he asked for a week to think things over. He wanted to make an appointment with his therapist. And I agreed to this on the condition that he wouldn't go on any other dates and generally work on himself during this week. I pointed out the fact that, he is freaking brilliant, probably one of the smartest people I've ever met, but he lacks extreme emotional intelligence. And as I explained to him, you're not understanding why it is that you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's really actually just fear that's driving this. And so I need you to understand that and learn that. He still expressed an interest in meeting my friends that day. And I really wanted him to, considering that I felt like this could be a pivotal moment for us. Additionally, his uncle, who was like a father figure to him, was coming into town this week during that break period. And I was really hoping to meet him as well, thinking like that would have been significant, but I wasn't sure if that was going to happen anymore. Regardless, we did end up attending the psychic fair together. And you know what? He did amazingly well. He mingled with my friends. He never once complained or asked to leave, despite the fact that I was pulling him in multiple directions and introducing him to a multitude of people. Even when I would wander off myself, he would come and find me. He was so patient and incredibly kind to all my friends, and my friends really liked him. Now, seeing this adaptability and the consideration that he had, especially considering that he was an introvert, was the moment that my affection for him turned into love, even though I never shared this with him. I do understand that there were red flags, but I also understood that there was underlying causes. I never once questioned his feelings for me during this entire time, or even felt insecure about it. I always felt genuine warmth and care from him, even when he was in his shutdown mode. Now, on top of this, I did end up meeting his uncle, and I felt extremely honored. He was a lovely man. With that, and my feelings as they're starting to grow, for the first time, I did start feeling anxiety, recognizing all of what was going on. So I messaged him and said, hey, like, we don't need this break anymore, right? Like, can you just tell me now? Yeah, I need you to tell me now what it is that you want. And he was like, we'll talk Saturday, and with a little smiley face. And I was like, nope, that's not going to work for me. That wasn't good for me, because the anxiety I was feeling was just becoming very overwhelming. And I started flooding him with these messages. And when I noticed his lack of response, I realized, okay, I'm flooding him. He's being overwhelmed by this, and I need to stop. I need to get my shit together, because I promised him a week, and I would stand by that word, which I did. A couple of days later, he did text me explaining that he found out he had to work Saturday night, but he offered to meet up during the day or on Sunday. And I was very appreciative of this, because he must have been kind of aware of how much my anxieties were coming through, offering to come before work. But I chose Sunday, explaining that it would give me more time to reflect on how I was feeling about things. I think he misunderstood what I meant by this, because I think he was thinking I was referring to the feelings I had for him instead of like why I was feeling anxious. Because I woke up on Sunday morning where he stated that he had thought about things and he just wasn't ready for anything serious, but he was still open to dating me and would really love to see me. But if it was too hard, then perhaps it wasn't a good idea. Now, he had to have known this was going to upset me, and possibly maybe even he was hoping for it, for some kind of negative reaction as a way to avoid to have to talk to me about what drove his decision or how he was really truly feeling. But I stood firm, and I reminded him of my boundaries and said, listen, I told you I will no longer date you. So you can either come over here and we can talk about this in person and see if we can move forward, or we can be done. He said, I'm sorry. I'm just not ready for anything at this point. But I'll come over, but not if we're going to talk all night long about it. Now, this is blatant manipulation. I mean, first of all, he's breadcrumbing by using these words. I'm not ready for anything at this point, indicating, I'll be ready sometime in the future, but I'm not going to give you any clarity of when that's going to be. So you're just going to have to wait. Fortunately, though, he did choose to show up, and I had questioned him about how he came to this decision. I said, did you discuss it with your therapist? Did you read any of those books that I suggested? Which he hadn't. He hadn't done anything. He didn't even make an appointment to see his therapist. So I was like, well, did you keep your word about not going on dates? And he was like, yeah, of course. I was like, okay, so great. You made this decision completely out of fear. Now, during the week off, I did send him some information on what is called the Venus sequence, which is part of the Gene Keys. And this is the sequence that helps you understand relationship progression and like identifying wounds needing to heal so you can have these more fulfilling connections. So I said, you know what? I'm going to have you read that. I want you to read it right now. He's like, no. And I was like, yep. And he did. And it left him really speechless afterwards, because it's really on point. That is the whole concept behind the Gene Keys. It's kind of like this fostering of the self-awareness. Well, once you read it, it's not supposed to like come through as this like immediate change, but it's like your epigenetics are processing it in the background. So it allows for more of long-term growth. And I could feel it. I could feel it ruminating in him. But then he brought up his ex, and I quickly redirected that conversation as well, explaining that what he was doing was known as what is called the phantom ex syndrome. This is a tendency to idealize an ex or a relationship to keep the current partner that you're seeing at a distance, especially for avoidance. This often involves overvaluing the past relationship, and if they were get back together, they most likely would not work out. He asked, hey, do you want to spend Thanksgiving together? I was like, yeah, of course, because I freaking love the holidays. We came up with this plan that we were going to spend the entire day together. We were going to go grocery shop together, cook together, just like this cute little domesticated couple. And after making these plans, I felt, okay, well, a bit more secure about things, because I assumed that he was respecting my needs and boundaries. But I also didn't want to put pressure on him about exclusivity or commitment, because I was giving him space to kind of process everything we had discussed. And I believe that we were moving forward until the next morning when I said, hey, do you mind if I come over the night prior? I don't want to be rushed in the morning. I want to be able to wake up for the holiday, enjoy our time together, and then we get the day started. And he looks at me and he's like, we'll see, and walks out the door. I was definitely taken back by his response, as it clearly indicated that he felt we were just back to dating. Fine, you want to date? Then that's what I'm going to do. Remembering, of course, what he had said earlier about how it would motivate him to commit, So he left my place on a Monday and Thanksgiving was on a Thursday. I did not really think I was going to meet anybody within that 4-day period, but I did. This has never happened to me in my entire life. I mean, it takes me a long time to find somebody that I feel is worth talking to, much less wanting to go on a date with. I mean, it took me 2.5 years to get past the first date with A. However, I didn't want to just use this new person as a way to commit a secure commitment with A, but I decided, I'll talk to him and just kind of see how things were going and how I felt about it. And it was really evident that this man was genuinely interested in getting to know me, as he had asked questions that A had not even asked in the entire 4 months that we had been dating. I was like, well, I'm not going to go on any dates with this new guy until I had a chance to talk to A about it. It was important to me to handle the situation with integrity and honesty. Now, despite all of this tension going on, Thanksgiving turned out to actually be wonderful. It was probably one of the best I've ever had. And I've had a lot of awesome Thanksgivings, and he had said the same. So even earlier in the day, I did tell him about the other guy I had met, which led him to be more noticeably affectionate and loving towards me. It kind of seemed like the actions that I wanted had the desired effect. So I was like, all right, well, maybe I don't even need to talk to this other guy anymore, because the day was going exactly how I wanted it to. We even did the turkey wishbone, which I ended up winning. And, he had asked, well, can I share my wish with you since I didn't win? And I was like, yeah, of course. And he looked at me so sincerely and so innocently, just saying, my wish for you is to be happy. I just want you to be happy. And I could literally feel the love from him at that moment. You are what makes me happy. Being with you is what makes me happy. And everything was great until we went to bed. I'm not honestly sure what triggered it, but all of a sudden he started speaking about his exes, one in particular from years prior, on this very concerning level of interest in her well-being and her relationships. And that's led to him kind of saying how he checks up on all of his exes to make sure they're happy, to make sure that the quality of the relationship was really good, which was strange and confusing to me. And I was questioning, like, what? Why would you do that? And he said, like, hey, when I love somebody, I love them forever. Just because I'm not with them doesn't mean I don't care about them anymore. It's important to me. I want to make sure that they're happy, because their happiness is what matters to me. Kind of confirmed to me what I had felt from him a couple hours prior. But then it shifted into how relationships are so complicated. And I'm like, not really. I'm like, they're only complicated if you make them that way. And he rebutted, saying, like, people always end up in divorce and relationships rarely work out. And I knew this was leading to him saying that he didn't want anything serious with me, which he did, which led into another argument, of course, him stating that he was never committed to me. We were never serious. We were never in a relationship. We were only just dating. And then completely out of the blue, he's like, it's not like I love you. And I was like, well, I don't love you either. Even though that wasn't true, but I knew that what he's saying wasn't true either. And I was so frustrated. And everything just felt like such a lie. And I just started crying. The next morning, though, I woke up just sobbing. And he held me, and he didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But eventually he had to get up to leave for work, and getting ready to go. He did say, like, I still care about you. I really do want to date you. I'm just not ready for anything serious right now. And I was like, how many times do I have to tell you? This is not what I signed up for. Like, look at what happened last night. And I said, why do you even want to date me if you're not ready for anything serious? Like, isn't that the whole point of dating? And he's like, yeah, you're right. Maybe I just need to stay off the apps for the next 6 months. So when I left this place, he gave me a kiss goodbye, but we didn't really have this like definitive ending or clarification on what was going to happen next. Like, there was no promise like, hey, I'll talk to you tomorrow, or I never want to hear from you again. And not to mention, his lifelong best friend was due to come to town for a visit that I had been previously invited to meet him, but I figured, well, that one's probably off the table. I was just really uncertain about things, and I thought, maybe I just need to go on a date with this other guy. Let's just see how I feel. Maybe there'll be this spark. There wasn't. I mean, the entire time I went on the date with the other guy, I just felt so horribly guilty. It's not like me. I don't date more than one person. I mean, I'm not technically even dating A at this time, but I just didn't feel good about it. And I had no interest in seeing this man again, despite the fact that, he was good looking and nice. I have strong feelings for A. Like, I need to seek out some clarity of why this is happening. Why did I meet A? So I turned to predictive astrology. Now, there's a calculated point in one's chart called the vertex. And when a transiting planet is aspecting it, it can indicate a fated event or an encounter with a person that's meant to come into your life. Now, ironically, the day that he had connected with me on the app, Venus, which is the planet of love and relationships, was conjunct with his natal vertex. And this is the strongest alignment that you can have. The next day, when I connected back to him, my Venus was in conjunct with his natal vertex, yet another theme of this opposition. This is a really rare occurrence. So it showcased, like, A and I were definitely meant to meet. So I was like, okay, well, if we're having these challenges, if things are going the way that they're supposed to, what is the lesson that I'm supposed to be learning here? What is the lesson that we're supposed to learn? And where do we go to learn our lessons? Saturn. So I began listening to Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil by Liz Greene, and it just offered this floodlight of clarity about the situation. I was like, oh my God, I have to share this with him. Because despite him being very logic-based mindset, he's actually really open to hearing about all my astrological and human design findings, which I hadn't even realized was an important thing to me in a relationship until he gave me that. Like his support in this, that like a whole new standard of what I needed from a future partner. Now, after days without speaking to A, I was really hesitant about reaching out to him again because I didn't want it to appear that I was compromising my own boundaries. My plan, though, was to share these astrological insights that I discovered, and then I was just going to slip in there about the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, I went on a date. Now, this was meant to hint at moving on if he wasn't ready to meet my needs. However, in hindsight, I recognized like this is a really manipulative tactic, and it was just this desperate attempt to salvage our relationship. But at the same time, I also thought that I was handling the situation correctly because he had told me like that motivation that he needed. So I was thinking, okay, well, if I tell him this, it's going to want to motivate him to commit to me. However, using manipulation to secure a commitment only leads to an insecure relationship, which we already had at this point. So I think I kind of slipped into this subconscious survival mode, triggered likely on Thanksgiving. And this activated this constant state of flight and fight. It was like this app just running in the background for this next command because no amount of emotional intelligence or psychological knowledge can fully protect you if you continue to put yourself in a harmful situation. So when I did send him that information, I did find out, though, that his lifelong best friend was actually in town, and he asked me if I wanted to meet him because his friend wanted to meet me, and he really wanted to see me. And I was like, oh, yes, of course. I wanted to do that. I felt very honored by the fact that he even asked. So I went out of my way to meet his friends. Afterwards, A walks me out to my car, expressing his appreciation for me and his friend, and mentioning how sweet and good of a person I am. He gave me this hug and a kiss on the cheek, but there was just this like odd, sad awkwardness in his gesture. I could feel like something was off. Waking up the next morning, I felt this immediate urge to go check that for him. And something was pushing me there, and I was dreading it because I knew I was going to see something that I didn't want to see, and I sure did. About 20 minutes prior, someone had posted about A, and my heart just shattered. My initial reaction was rage because I was like, wow, great, just another liar and a narcissist, and he's just going to go right back off to dating to get some validation from somebody else. Didn't even probably wait a day, but I was like, okay, stop. Like, I'm super triggered right now, and I'm making assumptions, and I need to stop. And I decided the respectable thing would be to ask him directly in person because maybe he just went on the app because I wanted to date with somebody and he was upset about that. So he felt like that's what he needed to do. Who knows? So I messaged him. I said, hey, you know what? I know you work late tonight, but I'm just going to swing by afterwards because I have something to talk to you about and it's really important to me. I need to talk to you tonight about it and it can't be through text. So I'll see you at 9. I assumed that he would agree, given the fact that like 12 hours prior, I was the most amazing person to him. However, his response was, I don't really think that's a good idea right now. For the first time, I felt like this cold detachment from him. And I was just like, oh shit. Now, trying to keep my composure, I insisted, no, this is really important to me. I need this. You know, I wouldn't ask this of you. I don't ask anything unless it's really needed. I will be there at 9. It's like, no, you're not coming. I'll talk to you on the phone either tomorrow or the weekend. I won't leave you hanging, but that's it. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, we've never spoken on the phone. So I knew that wasn't going to happen. And I was like, why? What's going on? Like, do you have plans? His response was, you're not respecting my needs or boundaries and you're not coming. Now, this only made me more determined because now it was shifting back into this gaslighting and stonewalling by reframing my legitimate request for communication as an intrusion. Like I was violating his boundaries and his needs, even though I was the one that was asking for something that I needed. Now, on a side note, I should mention, I cannot just show up at his place. It's not like I'm going to go there and bang down the door because he lives in a secure building. So if I go, it's just me sitting outside until he lets me come in. But either way, I insisted that I was going to go. And I was like, you're being super manipulative right now. That's not fair. You cannot throw something back in my face when I've asked you for something. And he warned me if I come, it would be wasting my time because he wasn't going to be there. Now, I'm going to interrupt this important narrative to discuss a message from the perspective of emotional intelligence. Because even though my intention was pure, my approach was not appropriate. I was trying to use this nonviolent communication technique, aiming to understand the situation without jumping to conclusions or make assumptions about his character. But the problem about effective communication is that it requires participations from both sides. And he was not giving that to me. There's three potential right paths that should have been taken instead. The first one would have been disengagement. Upon realizing that his reoccurrence of this unhealthy pattern of emotionally abusive tactics, I should have ordered my boundary and said, nope, and walked away. Second thing is that he could have just said, hey, yeah, I'll meet you, because we've had these mature conversations in person previous times before, because he sees me or what, but he can usually recognize his behavior and it stops. The third solution would have just been clear communication. He could have thought out clarification of what it is that I needed to talk to him about instead of making assumptions of whatever he thought I wanted to talk to him about. Understand my intentions and acknowledge my needs and say, hey, you know what? Why don't you come over tomorrow at 7 o'clock instead? We could talk then, because today I'm just really tired. I've had a long day. My friend just left. I mean, I did want to speak with him that night, but because I knew like the trigger was building up inside of me, but as long as he explained to me that why he was acting the way he was, and I would have been calmed down and I would have waited. Of course, none of those paths were taken. And I decided, well, I might test his claim of being this dismissive avoidant, because my thinking was, well, if he really truly is just an avoidant, he would make sure that when I got there, he would come down and let me in, because his empathy would override his fear of avoidant. Usually when you state your needs and reasons, avoidant will respond to you with empathy versus dismissing you completely. However, if he exhibited high narcissistic traits, he would completely disregard my needs. He wouldn't show up and he wouldn't have any empathy for me. And it was only going to be about him. I went there and waited 15 minutes, but he didn't come down or respond to any of my texts. During those 15 minutes, my anger was building up inside of me. So I sent him this message afterwards, intending to hurt him just as much as I was hurting. And I did feel temporary satisfaction until the next morning when I regretted everything. And I decided I'm going to write an email. I needed to explain my actions. But before I could, A actually reached out to me. He stated that he knew my message was meant to hurt him. It wasn't so much the words that I used, but it was the way I delivered it. And despite that, like, his intention was never to hurt me. And he has never done that, nor does he want to ever do that. But he made it clear that he did not want anything serious with me. And, he was still willing to talk and would consider a friendship with me. I saw through this response, like a mile away. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're trying to induce guilt by asserting me that you would never hurt me. And how dare I do that to him, despite the fact that you've already hurt me quite a few times, and claiming that, he was clear in the relationship that he didn't want a relationship, indicating that my feelings weren't valid. Like I was being delusional or thinking that we were something more than what we were. And I was just making all this up in my head. Yet for the first 3 months, that's all he talked about, is how he wanted this emotional, intimate relationship that would lead into marriage. I did acknowledge my intention and I apologized about trying to hurt him. And I was like, yep, you're definitely right. I was trying to do that. And I was trying to sabotage what we had between us because you really upset me last night. And I'm not okay with that. I'm going to write you an email and you can decide if you want to read it. Now, what's important to understand is that while I'm writing this, I was still in the flight and fight mode. I was so already triggered by everything that had happened. And then that message he sent, and I didn't realize it because it wasn't until afterwards that I did. Because I was pulling out every tactic I could look for some kind of validation to figure out, okay, what is the type of person that I am dealing with here? I wanted to get him to react thinking like, oh, well, if I could just prove that he's a narcissist or a sociopath, then I don't have to care for him anymore. But in reality, I was just trying to get him to react, to show that I actually mattered to him. I was looking for validation from him, not of him. Now, this email was completely pointless because even though I was thinking in my head, like I was trying to be nice and express my feelings, in reality, my emotions were all over the place. I mean, the email was just this back and forth of fight and flawn. Then even at the end, I told him like, you know what? I don't even want you anymore. Yeah, I want this other man because he's so much better and so much nicer and so much better looking than you. And you just lost me like all your ex-girlfriends because of your issues, because you have a problem. I'm thinking, well, if he's a narcissist, he's going to not allow me to choose another man over him. Like that's going to force him to fight for me, right? Again, okay, you know what? Not everybody's cookie cutter in these situations. Not to mention, I don't even know if he's a narcissist. I'm just assuming this. And even if he was, it doesn't mean that he's going to react the way that he is, because there are different types of narcissists. He could be a vulnerable one, which would, me stating what I said would make the situation so much worse. Now, my email obviously did not provoke the response that I wanted, nor did any message I sent in between there and afterwards. And it just got to a point where I was like, okay, stop. Like, this needs to stop. You're being intentionally hurtful right now because you're being abusive. You're stonewalling me and we're back to where we were. And I'm like, stop it. And he writes, not stonewalling you, because stonewalling only happens in relationships and we were never in one. Seriously, can we just stop? Please just stop. Like, let's just have a mature conversation. You said you would talk to me. Why are you talking to me? You told me you wouldn't leave me hanging. He's like, what is there to talk about? I don't want a relationship with you. I don't want to date you. And now, because of your behavior, I don't even want to be friends with you. Leave me alone. And then he blocks me. Those choice of words that he used and the action that he took blew me into a full-blown panic attack. I felt like I was being transported in time right back in front of my ex, because he would say the same shit to me just as much. Like, oh, when you're a good girl, I love you. You're the best. You're awesome. I'm so lucky. Thank you so much for fighting for us. But the moment I would get upset, no matter what he did, it was, yeah, I don't love you anymore. I don't want anything to do with you. I will never love you again because of how you behave. Not to mention, I told A that previous Sunday that I did actually end up blocking him because I didn't want to get his message in case it would start a fight. But somehow it still came through. And he got really upset with me about that. He was like, don't do that. Don't you ever do that? Why would you do that? That's so mean. But yet he goes and then does it to me. So I knew it was intentional cruelty because he was also knew what he was putting me through. I had told him all the things that my ex would do and what drove me to my suicide attempt. After that, like in this desperation, I was just like, oh my God, I need this to stop. I mean, my heart rate over 120. I felt like there was ants just crawling all over my body. I felt like my skin was on fire. So I emailed him this voice note thinking, okay, well, if he hears my voice, he's going to hear that I'm upset. And I said, what is it that I can do for you? Tell me, what is it that you need for you to stop doing this? This is intentionally hurting me. I need you to stop. And if you don't respond within the hour, I'm going to post on the forum that you're a sociopathic predator. This is how you know I'm like full-blown trigger mode at this time. Because right now, this is the tactic that I would use with my ex to get him to stop doing shit when he would do it. Because I felt like at the moment, like that's who I was really, I thought like A was my ex. And I felt like I was just right back there. Now, after an hour had passed, A, of course, did not respond. But I didn't follow through with my threat. I had no intention of doing it anyways, because no matter how triggered I am, my empathy will override any potential long-term damaging action. Instead, I went and allowed my Scorpion shadow side to come out. And I sent him a message just attacking every little fear that I knew he had, every little insecurity I could think of, to just release this pent-up rage that I felt towards him at the time. Waking up the next morning, I felt terrible about my behavior. I was so disappointed in myself. And even though I knew it was like a reaction to his toxic actions, I felt like I should have been the bigger person. I ended up sending him an email that morning, apologizing, saying, you know what? I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to ever see you again, but I'm sorry that I did that. I cannot believe I did it. I'm so sorry. I wish you the best. However, part of me expected that he would still reach out at some point, like with an apology or at least the acknowledgement of his actions, because I was confused. I'm like, what did even happen? Like, how do we go from 12 hours to me being the best person to you to not wanting to have anything to do with me again? I thought if he has high levels of sociopathic or narcissistic traits, my negative reaction would have threatened his sense of security or whatever illusion that he had over me. It would lead him to sever all ties with me, and he's never going to give me closure. And because he will have no remorse or care about what happened or how I'm doing or how it affected me, and history would be officially repeating itself. However, this experience was very different from the past one, and I felt it really deeply. And I still do not believe that he is a narcissist or a sociopath. I think that he has a trauma response that he's grappling with, his own form of complex PTSD, and it's coming through whenever he feels overwhelmed or threatened. And, considering like his human design, his gate 10 sits in Neptune, which means that his actions and those narcissistic reactions are going to be driven by these subconscious fears and trauma, and it's going to be pushed through that gate 10 shadow. Then I am going to mirror his actions to him, which I definitely did because I do not possess gate 10. Well, with all of this, I decided, okay, it's time to get back into therapy because I need to figure out what's going on with these trigger responses because it should not have happened. I am cognitively aware, like this isn't okay. I'm trying to do everything to stop it. But when I'm in those triggered moments, my body is just like, nope, we're dying. Sometimes, guess what? It fucking feels that way because my heart rate gets over 120. I think the highest I've ever had it is at a point is at 210. While I was going to therapy, I also continued exploring astrology because I didn't want to necessarily prove like this fated connection anymore, but I wanted to understand what the purpose of all this was. Like instead of finding these reasons for separation or that we were meant to separate, I found the exact opposite. There's meant to be this growth and transformation, and we're going to experience these upheavals because every time we do, it allows us to grow into this personal development. It doesn't really matter what the stars say. If you're not in alignment with your path or your true connections, it's going to be meaningless because it's not going to work out. Or I did discover what was driving his actions, at least astrologically. Okay, bear with me because you're going to get a little lesson in predictive astrology. I am only referring to one part of predictive astrology, which is the planetary transit. This is the current movement of planets in the sky and their positions relative to the person's natal chart. This associates with external events and circumstances that can happen to a person. It can indicate periods of opportunity, challenge, change, or stability. So first off, the planets or asteroids, also including the luminaries, the sun and the moon, transit the natal planets, they will tell you what will be happening. The angle or the aspect to which the transiting planet is aspecting the natal planet will tell you why or how it will affect you. The houses will tell you where in your life it will affect you. Natal houses is where the houses were when the person was born. So this will tell you where the transits begin. The transiting house, meaning where the planet currently is in the sky, will tell you where the main theme happens. And the ruling planets of the transits will then tell you where the consequence, reward, or the outcome will end. So as for A, his main transit that was happening was his Uranus was squaring his sun. This means that things are changing at this time, possibly as a result or a friend of an enemy. And it may be due to something that this person has done from deep inside of you in response to events that have veered out of your control. It's forcing you to grow to a previously unsurpassed level of maturity, and the sadness and pain that will most likely come around this will pay off later on in terms of improved understanding. Because Uranus is the planet of chaos, and the sun represents the self, particularly the ego self. A's Uranus natal house position is the 5th house, which in this case represents romance and true love. The sun natally sits in the 8th house, which is intimacy, transformation, death, or birth. It's transiting in the 11th house, which is our social groups, or can indicate going into therapy. And the 6th house is commitment and health. So pushing him back into therapy to deal with his mental health and the fear of commitment. The ruling houses are the 11th house. And then we're going back to the 5th house. So this is where the outcome of the transit is. The 11th house is ruled by Aquarius, as well as Uranus, being one of Aquarius's ruling houses. And that 5th house is ruled by Leo, and the sun being its ruling planet. So with me, this was meant to be an upheaval, to force change, and it circles back to us. It's to make us separate, reconnect, grow, and connect us back together. But that's only half of it. Just bear with me. Because before I discovered this, the second half that I'm about to share, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell A about this because this makes so much sense. Like, all of this was meant to happen, and now he's going to understand that. Now, I assume that I was still probably blocked, and I wasn't sure if he would get my email. So I decided I'm going to write a letter. My intention was to be honest and understanding. And I even ran it through the letter through like ChatGPT to ensure I wasn't like subconsciously being manipulative or accusatory in any way. I was like, I want this to be right. And I expressed to him that I missed him. And I said, it's been a couple of weeks at this point, and I had this desire for closure, and I was really hoping to reconnect with him at least before Christmas, because Christmas is a time for joy and forgiveness. And it's one of my favorite holidays. And I just really wanted a good Christmas. I didn't want to be sad. I did not receive anything from him. There's got to be something here I'm not seeing. Now, this is where things get even crazier, because starting around Thanksgiving, remember when I said I thought my trigger came in? Saturn started opposing my natal Venus. This transit indicates that someone is interacting in your life in a way contrary to what you want. Someone is doing something to you. And furthermore, it's their fault. And this is a theme of this opposition, is blame. It's how this is reflected within us, right? So there's always this choice that comes with an opposition. Saturn was transiting the 3rd house of communication, but ends in its ruling house, the 10th and 11th house, which the 10th house is ruled by Capricorn. And like I said, the 11th house is ruled by Aquarius. A is a Capricorn moon, and then, like I said, an Aquarius sun. Of course, Venus then is the planet of relationships, which ends at 2nd and 7th house. So we're looking at relationships and how that affects my self-worth. But Venus is also transiting in the 1st, which pertains to the self-awareness of one's own actions. I would love to hear a skeptic state like, oh, that's just a coincidence. Like, I can't place the planets. I can't put the ruling planets where they belong. Not to mention, according to statistics, to be able to declare statistical significance, it means that it has to be 5% lower probability. Hence, it's likely to be a meaningful relationship rather than just a coincidence. Okay, well, do you want to know the statistical probability of his Uranus squaring his sun at the same time my Saturn is opposing my Venus with our ruling planets? It is approximately 0.00037%. So it's akin to basically winning the jackpot lottery. So I guess when A said that he won the lottery, he definitely was right. Furthermore, as I stated, the 11th house can symbolize the pursuit of therapy, which I did go into, and that was way before I saw the transit. This is just basically saying, like, everything was meant to happen the way it's supposed to. It had to get that bad to instigate whatever change needed to happen, which makes sense because I did try approaching this from a place of love and patience. I mean, before Thanksgiving, I gave him space to think about things. I was supportive. I gave him things to learn from, but nothing changed. Of course, it also forced me to look at my own actions, and I realized, like, I still have work to do. It's really challenging involving these spiritual aspects to the situation, despite it being so simple. I mean, the solution's right there. It's like literally mapped out in the sky. Great. I see the problem. You change. I change. This will lead us to a rewarding relationship. Beautiful. But I can't convince him of that. I mean, he wasn't even responding to me. So knowing all this, I was just feeling so overwhelmed, and I was on this roller coaster of emotions. And as Christmas approached, my anxiety started intensifying. I couldn't understand why he hadn't reached out, and it was just leaving me to wonder, like, if everything was just a lie. But you know what? I don't give up until I go about it from every angle. So a few days before Christmas, I decided to reach out to him again, and I sent him an email, no response. I sent him another one from a different angle, no response. Okay, well, I'm not giving up yet. So my last effort was, I'm like, I'm going to send him a video, and like, let's hope he watches it. And then if he could just see how stressed out I am and how much it's upsetting me, then initiate some kind of response. Like, unfortunately, nothing. After that, my anxiety just kind of escalated to this panic. Like, I was feeling intense physical and emotional turmoil again. I was like, I don't know who to reach out to because it's close to Christmas. My therapist wasn't available. I'm like, I don't want any of my friends to judge me. But you know what? True friends don't judge. And I'm lucky because I have friends that are amazing and supportive. So I did call a friend who, despite some tough love, was able to calm me down. Previously, I have found solace in ayahuasca during severe PTSD episodes. I just want to make it very clear, though, that I am not recommending to anybody to go and take ayahuasca if you have anxiety or PTSD. Do not take any drugs or psychedelic substance without some kind of help from a mental professional or a shaman that is trained in this. It is not safe to do it on your own, and it is potentially damaging, especially if you take any other medications. So please, please, please do your research. I'm not telling you to do this. This is what I did. And this was my 6th ayahuasca journey. And it was distinctly different from all the previous ones because my relationship with ayahuasca is very unique. And this time before taking it, I set the intention. I was holding on to my little drink and I said, I just need you to purge whatever trauma is in my body right now. When you ask ayahuasca to purge something from your body, oh, she's going to do that. This was probably the most challenging physical experience I have ever had. There was no hallucination. There was no spiritual journey or little green men. It was just sheer physical pain. But I did wake up and I had my anxiety definitely has subsided. However, I'm also aware that this does not mean that I am fully healed. Complex PTSD is an ongoing process, and it's something I'm going to continue to go to therapy twice a week. And the more that I become more aware of these triggers and I train my body on how to respond, those flashbacks will become less severe and I'll be able to handle them. You know, navigating triggered states is challenging because it's difficult to remember that emotions are temporary. And reflecting on the situation with A, I understand, like, honestly, neither of us are entirely at fault. It's particularly challenging when it comes to emotional abuse due to the invisibility and the unseen scars. What you can't see is often unbelieved. Those who inflict emotional abuse often carry their own emotional wounds because it's something they learned in childhood, and they may not be fully comprehensive of their own actions. In addition, societal norms, especially for men, discourage showing any kind of emotion, especially when it's deemed as negative. So this complicates the understanding of the impact emotional abuse has on another person. Older generations may not even acknowledge that emotional abuse even exists, wasn't widely recognized in their time. It's only recently have we begun to understand the seriousness of these issues, such as sexual, domestic, or physical abuse. For the current generations, particularly like the Gen Xers or the early millennials and onward, there's been this conflict between today's awareness and the beliefs that have been instilled by our caretakers. Those older beliefs often include coping mechanisms, so they may not align with the current understanding of emotional health and expression. So confronting somebody about abuse, particularly if they have experienced it themselves, it's a really complex and delicate matter. This is because, like, the act of confrontation often triggers shame, particularly when abuse is applied that there's some kind of intentional behavior there. There's going to be this natural tendency to just want to deny this accusation because the notion of consciously choosing to inflict harm on somebody is extremely disturbing. Nobody wants to believe that they're capable of perpetuating the same harmful patterns that they've been exposed to as a child. It's important to understand that harmful intentions can be driven subconsciously, even though individuals may not be fully aware of the damage they are causing, nor recognize it as abusive. Psychological issues can lead to unintentional behaviors that will lead to controlling, belittling, or manipulating others. They can have the same effects as intentional abuse. However, when these behaviors become persistent and continue into this pattern, even after gaining awareness, those triggered responses then evolve into conditioned reactions. Recovery from such patterns involves time, patience, and awareness and understanding. And the first step towards change, of course, is acknowledging it. So acknowledging that the existence and the impact of these behaviors without feeling accused or shamed about it can begin to heal and forgive themselves for their past behaviors. It's about transforming pain and misunderstanding into an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding. crucial to distinguish, though, that my discussion here solely pertains to emotional abuse. Not that I'm downplaying its severity, because I will be the first one to say, do not minimize it. But it's important to know that in these cases of physical or sexual abuse, if that's something that you're involved in, that's a priority, and it's a situation that must be left quickly and safely. But as regarding emotional abuse, there is room for forgiveness, because emotional abuse can fall on a spectrum within itself. And it obviously depends on the person's threshold for what they can endure and whether both parties are informed and are willing to engage in a healing process. If one partner is educated and aware enough to support the other, it can lead to what is known as relational healing. I want to clarify that I understand that some people may feel like, oh, I didn't get a response, I shouldn't have messaged him, I should have just stopped. I wasn't harassing him. I wasn't demanding anything from him. It was not my intention to do so. My actions are aimed to get this peace of mind while being able to express myself. That is part of my mental processing in dealing with relationships. Not only am I a Gemini moon, but I also have the gate of rationalization in my unconscious Venus. I don't know how else to go about it. While I recognize it may not be the healthiest approach, it is currently what works for me. A knows this about me as well. I told him I have to get out what I need to say. If I don't get an answer or a reason why, I will continue until I get the answer. Now, from A's perspective, he could have argued too that he told me weeks ago to leave him alone. He did say that 2 months prior, and then afterwards that he didn't mean it. So, why would I believe that? I do want to address a few points, though, from my side of things as well. First, I imagine most listening would think I must have an anxious attachment style based off my actions. But this is my point to not fitting things in a box. According to the attachment theory, I would have this huge fear of abandonment, a high view of others, and a low view of myself. I don't. I am not afraid of being abandoned. I have lived most of my life alone. I am afraid that the person that I fall for ends up being someone they're not. That actually would place me under a fearful avoidant, with maybe that leans anxious. But again, that too qualifies as a low view of others and the self. I don't think I am unworthy of love, despite being told that I'm not. I am also not jaded. The anxious feelings surfaced once my feelings grew from him due to the fear of ultimately what happened. But I don't have a low view of others. I don't have a low view of myself. The way that I act is due to trauma responses from my past experiences. One thing to point out too is that my therapist suggested that my feelings for him may not be genuine, that it may be this trauma bond. For those that are not familiar with the term trauma bond, a trauma bond is an unhealthy emotional attachment to someone who causes harm. It's a psychological response to trauma or abuse that often develops from a cycle of abuse and positive reinforcement. It's the back and forth of the, I love you, I'm going to take it away, I love you, I'll take it away. When this occurs between partners, it's considered a trauma bonded relationship. Trauma bonds do not just happen in romantic relationships. They can occur between friends, colleagues, family members. They can make a victim feel compelled to stay in a situation or relationship. While I respect her opinion and expertise, I am also very familiar with trauma bonds, especially since I had one with my ex. So I don't entirely agree with her assessment in this case. She came to this conclusion due to my desire to hear from him, which is similar to craving for this high, suggesting any form of communication from him, when mean or nice, would temporarily satisfy my needs. And she was right, because I did express to him, I don't care what you say, just say something, because the silence is driving me crazy. Self-perceived silence is a clear answer that they're not interested, but I don't. I interpret it as someone leaving the door open, even though it may be dark on the other side. I mean, if I was truly in a trauma bond with him, I believe I would still be experiencing these high levels of anxiety or resorted to more extreme measures, like calling from a different number. My response is definitely a form of fawning. It's driven from this need to rationalize the situation. I need to find the reason why. However, I did hear from him. And you know what? There was no sense of satisfaction. In fact, it was only just more confusion. He emailed me. He thanked me for the Christmas gifts that I'd given him, because prior to this, I had purchased gifts thinking that we were going to be on good terms by Christmas, but then he followed it up with, hope you're doing well, and that's it. I found it to be so strange that I couldn't even get mad at the fact that he knows I haven't been doing well. And not to mention, he sent it days after he got the gifts, packages are tracked, I know when you got them. So I responded, expressing my desire to still speak with him and say, but if you need more time, I understand, but can you please communicate with me? That would be really greatly appreciated. Nothing. I did send up a follow-up a couple of days after. I explained to him why the silence was hurtful, providing him with his own story that he had shared with me, when he wasn't given recognition that he had sought out. I also informed him, sending a message to thank me for coffee and candy, but not acknowledging my efforts or apologizing for his actions wasn't okay. That he obviously hadn't changed in this last month. So if that was the case, I will finally have to accept that he presented a false persona to me and nothing. So that's the end of the story. It might seem obvious to people that I should have walked away a lot sooner. I didn't choose to fight for him because I was okay with being mistreated or undervalued. Consciously, I am very well aware of my worth. Yet I also saw his potential, and I believe in overcoming challenges. Our situation wasn't unrecoverable. I mean, if he feels angry or wronged by me because of the one message that I sent him, yes, was very unkind, but still, he should understand that my reactions were defensive. You can't poke a lion and expect it not to bite back. I also made it clear to him that I would not tolerate disrespect or dishonesty. And if I suspected that was going on, he was going to see a monster come raging out of me and that he wasn't going to like her. And he was like, yeah, I can tell that about you. Now, it might be also easy for others to misconstrue my perspective as an idealist or delusional. I want to make it clear, I'm not defending him. I'm not defending his actions. Yes, I have protected him. I didn't explain his name. I didn't tell you what he does for a living. The reason why is because this is not meant to seek revenge for him. I'm not looking at making him look bad. I'm just trying to understand the dynamics at play and recognizing that these patterns is crucial for my own healing. Moving forward, whether he chooses to acknowledge his part or not. And people may also question too, like, why do I even care so much about a relationship that only lasted 4 months? But duration isn't the main concern. Time is just a concept. It's not about how long you like somebody, it's the depth of my feeling. And I genuinely cared for this man. And that meant a lot to me. Like, society has long tried to define love. It has to be like, oh, within this certain time frame or within this scientific concept. But feelings aren't based in logic. I mean, what happened to just falling in love with somebody or seeing like someone the first time thinking, oh my God, like this is the person I'm going to marry. Now, granted, I wasn't looking at as that way because I don't look at anybody that way. I don't look at relationships in that way. But it took me 3 months to develop any strong feelings for him, which is average according to studies. Not to mention sex increases oxytocin levels. And that was a lot of that going on. So it was pretty normal on how my feelings developed for him. While we were dating, I actually made a point not to reference any of the talks of the future with him because I didn't want to put any pressure on him. Yet he would talk about it all the time and would make these kind of side comments about us in the future. He even showed me a place that he wanted to buy and was like, hey, do you like this place? Would you move here with me in like 6 months? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Because I believed my feelings were genuine as I thought that his were for me. I really believed that there was a potential to overcome any challenge. I refused to let a triggered state like childhood trauma or societal norms dictate the validity of my feelings. Because after my experience with my ex, I did not think I would trust anybody ever again. So the fact that I did trust speaks volumes to me about how special he was. Unfortunately, I'm not sure he even realized it or the significance of how much I cared. I mean, maybe if he did, he would have been more understanding about addressing our issues rather than succumbing to his fear or trying to sabotage it. I also promised that I would fight for him. I told him, and I upheld that promise. Because the potential for all that he claimed that he wanted was there. But guess what? It requires effort and work, and no relationship is perfect. Like, relationships involve healthy conflict for a reason. It's about teaching you how to handle disagreements constructively that matter. Because most people actually do appreciate their partners and understand that these challenges can be opportunities for improvement, but it requires a level of emotional maturity. Because when those experiences are embraced, they can be incredibly rewarding. I don't know if I can believe everything was a lie. I'm not quite sure about that yet. I'm sure there's going to come to a time I am in the grieving process and my emotions change honestly around it every day. I'm truly devastated by the fact that I thought that he was different. I thought that he would respond to me. I thought that he cared. And it's really heartbreaking knowing that he didn't. As this love story comes to an end, it just allows a new chapter to be written. Wrapping all this up, though, I'm going to say the most important thing is the relationship you have to yourself, your health and your safety. If you find yourself that you are in a situation that is causing you severe emotional stress, I strongly encourage that you seek therapy. It is crucial, though, to find the right therapist. So don't hesitate to interview them. And if they don't work out, find another therapist, because therapy can be immensely beneficial. I just also want to say thank you so much for watching this video. If you've stuck with me this far, I really appreciate your attention. I hope that you found this information helpful. Please feel free to leave any comments, questions, or suggest any topics for any future discussions if you would like. And you can also reach out to me via my website. Thank you again for listening, and please share this with anybody else that you might know that might find it beneficial as well. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.